Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we sit down with guests to talk about a Disney Plus offering of their choosing. This show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. So if you like the show, please, and you can support us over there, we would definitely appreciate it. But if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome, and of course, we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast with your friends. Joining me this week, we have Steven Weber from Glitch Point and the Speedrun podcast. How you doing, Steven?
I'm doing great. I'm ready to talk some Star Wars.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun episode. You are our first non that nerdy site guest on the show, so welcome.
It's an honor.
It's good to have you. You're one of the people that reached out in kind of my first pass, a couple months ago now, of trying to get guests on the show, and I've just been with all of the craziness going on, I haven't had a chance to really reach out and start coordinating any of that. So I was glad when you reached back out and said, hey, I've got an update on where I was at on this whole thing, and I was like, perfect, let's just try and get it on the books and get it out of the way. So tell us a little bit before we dive into what we're going to be talking about. Tell us a little bit about Glitch Point and the Speedrun podcast.
Yeah, sure. So I host podcast Speedrun. It is a video game news show that airs every weekday, usually in the morning, and it covers all the video game news of the day in about 10 minutes or less. More often than not, it's around the 6 to 7 minute mark, but I try to read through the major stories, give some insights and my thoughts on it, and then move on. So it's kind of designed for people commuting, which obviously isn't happening a whole lot right now. But Glitch Point is kind of the umbrella that I had set up for future podcasts as well. But right now, the only podcast under said umbrella is Speedrun, so you can check it out on all major podcast platforms or follow on Twitter at Glitch Point.
Very cool. All right, so let us dive into this week's episode, which is going to be, per your choosing, all about the Clone Wars. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the Battle of Umbara story arc, which is Season 4, Episodes 7 through 10. That's Darkness on Umbara, The General, Plan of Descent, and Carnage of Krell. So tell me why you decided to focus on Clone Wars as a whole, and then why in this particular story arc.
Yeah, sure. So with Clone Wars, this is relatively new for me. So I've always been kind of a mainstream Star Wars fan, just kind of focused on the movies, never really read any of the books or watched the smaller shows like Clone Wars. And then when Rise of Skywalker and Jedi Fallen Order and The Mandalorian were all coming out, I caught the Star Wars bug like a lot of people, and I wanted to check out the Clone Wars. So I got really hooked on it, and that was right around the time when you had put out the poll on Twitter. So I was like, I would love to talk about Clone Wars on there when I wrap up. So timing was great on this. Mm-hmm. And as I was watching through the Darkness of Umbara arc, the Battle of Umbara arc rather, really stood out to me as exemplary of how Clone Wars can differentiate itself from the Star Wars films and provide a lot more of that character-driven story that the films don't really have as much time to kind of play with and focus on the clones individually. So that's why I ended up choosing this specific arc rather than some of the other ones.
Yeah, I think going back and rewatching it myself, I was thoroughly impressed on how the core people that from Star Wars are just completely absent from this, or like you have a little bit of Anakin and a little bit of Obi-Wan, but mostly this is focusing on the clones, and it's one of the exemplary kind of cases of that within the series. So
right.
As I was going into it, I was like, oh, I remember this, because it's been a while since I'd seen this, or since I'd rewatched this arc, and I was like, oh yeah, this is a good one, and the twists and turns and whatnot. I was like, yeah, I really appreciate that we get to see more in the lives of the clones throughout the series, instead of just always focusing on Anakin and Obi-Wan and Ahsoka and stuff. So excellent choice. A little bit of history lesson for everybody. This segment of the show originally aired between October 28th and November 18th of 2011. The show as a whole started back in October 3rd, 2008. Other notable releases of 2008 were Batman the Brave and the Bold and Ben 10 Alien Force. Both were the two names that most readily jumped out at me. Runtime for the show is about 23 minutes an episode, so these 4 episodes combined total about an hour and a half. In the Star Wars timeline of things, Clone Wars aired its original run October 2008 through March 2014, starting shortly after the theatrical film. which had aired in, or which had released in August of 2008, August 15th. And then in the larger timeline, or larger franchise history as a whole, it all released between Revenge of the Sith in May of 2005 and The Force Awakens in December of 2015. And for context, because I was curious, this actually aired, even this segment aired about a year before Disney bought Star Wars for $4.05 billion on October 30th, 2012 is when that announcement had happened. So this was still in the full-on Lucasfilm days before Disney kind of hopped into things. A little bit of the roll call on the film. You have 3 directors over the course of these 4 episodes. Stuart Lee starts us out in Darkness in Umbara, who'd done a handful of episodes of Clone Wars, Rebels, and Resistance, and pretty much that's his only IMDb credits. He's really only worked on Lucas stuff. Walter Murch does the second episode, The General, and he's primarily a sound editor, but he was also the writer and director of Return to Oz, and he also wrote THX 1138 with George Lucas. He was an Oscar winner for Apocalypse Now, and a rare double Oscar winner for Best Sound and Best Film Editing for The English Patient. So I was like, it was a weird choice for him to come in and do it, but he'd worked on a lot of sound and audio stuff over the years with Lucas, so I was like, okay, I get it. And then Kyle Dunleavy rounds out the 4 episodes, doing the Plan of Descent and Carnage of Krell episodes. He's done 22 episodes of Clone Wars, but he's primarily a visual effects person. He's done stuff like Transformers, Age of Extinction, Jurassic World, and Paddington 2, which I'm sure our nerdy friend Ben Bellevue would very much love. The writer of this series is Matt McNovitz, probably butchering that, Mac McNovitz, who was a staff writer for 24. He had done 3 episodes of Clone Wars before this. This was probably his major breakout arc. And then he's done 11 episodes of Rebels. He also wrote the Bad Batch arc of this most recent season that is currently airing of the Clone Wars. So
also a fantastic arc.
Exactly. As I was looking this up, I was like, that makes total sense after watching these 4 episodes and then having recently watched the Bad Batch episodes. And then he also has a story credit on Jedi Fallen Order that you touched on earlier. I saw that pop up and I was like, oh, did he write that? And he's like one of like 12 names that have like story or writing credits on that game. So, but yeah, it was a nice little touch there as well. In terms of starring, Clone Wars in general has a smaller cast. These 4 episodes in particular have like 5 people across all of them. You have D. Bradley Baker, who plays all the clone troopers, and he's kind of the standout of these episodes, certainly. Things that jumped out at me in looking through his IMDb: he was Olmec in Legends of the Hidden Temple from 1993 to 1995, and that was one of his like earlier voice roles. He was also Daffy Duck in the movie Space Jam and has played Daffy Duck on and off over the years since. He was Joe in the Beautiful Joe games. He was Klaus in American Dad from 2005 to 2019, and that's probably like that is the thing that IMDb has him like highest in there. And he has literally hundreds of other credits. I think 600 plus IMDb credits over his long and storied career.
It's crazy. I went on there as well when you noted hundreds of other credits. I was like, oh, I'll check it out. And it took me 10 to 15 minutes to scroll through everything. It's crazy the career this guy's had.
Yeah. You have the immediately recognizable Dave Fennoy playing General Krell, Pong Krell in this. And even in the timeline of things, like this was before Walking Dead, so he hadn't like broken out into his kind of like what he's known best for these days in the gaming community. But he had played Rodan in Bayonetta, and then of course he went on to play Lee Everett in Telltale's Walking Dead series, as well as Lucius Fox in both the Batman Arkham Knight game as well as Telltale's Batman games. And then most recently, I recognized him as Satan in the After Party game. So Dave Fennoy, very storied character, very storied voice, also has a ton of other credits to his name, but some of those are some of his more standout ones. You have a brief appearance from Matt Lanter as Anakin Skywalker in the first episode. He had done Commander in Chief. He was a kid on that, as well as a few episodes of Heroes back in the day. He was on the like 2009 reboot of 90210, and then most recently he had a Mandalorian cameo. He was on the episode where they go onto like the prisoner ship. He is like the one rebel person working the ship that gets killed off in there.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, that's Matt Lantern. That was his little cameo in that series. You have James Arnold Taylor, who has long been the voice of Obi-Wan in these series. I immediately remembered or recognized and had known for years as Titus or Titus from Final Fantasy X, because of his iconic laugh in that game. And then he also went on to play Ratchet in the Ratchet and Clank series. And then he's been doing Obi-Wan. Basically, he was Obi-Wan even in the precursor to this series of the Clone Wars, the 2D animated one that was more Samurai Jack style. Mm-hmm. And then he's gone and done Green Arrow in a whole bunch of DC stuff like Batman the Brave and the Bold, as well as recently Lego DC Supervillains. And then rounding out the starring, we have Tom Kane as the narrator. He has a career-long era of LucasArts projects, starting back in like the 90s with the Curse of Monkey Island games, as well as many a Star Wars game from that era. He was Darwin in the Wild Thornberrys, and then he's done a lot of stuff recently as Magneto in Marvel stuff like Ultimate Alliance 3. So that is kind of the who's who of the voice cast in these. And animated stuff is always fun with voice cast because it's like you're either going to get celebrities or you're going to get people who just have prolific voice careers.
Right.
And that's what pretty much all of these guys had.
And if you're going to have 5 people as your cast, this seems like a pretty solid list of people to have as your 5.
Indeed. A little bit of trivia. I kind of got these broken down episode by episode. You have the Jedi Fortune Cookie, which is the little message that pops up at the beginning of every episode of the Clone Wars. For Darkness on Umbara, the Jedi Fortune Cookie reads, "The first step towards loyalty is trust," which certainly is going to factor into the arc over here. Five's new helmet has an image of a Rishi eel, which is the same creature that had attacked his squad back in the season 1 episode Rookies that like introduced him to the series. I'm curious, when you were watching it, Steve, did you play or did you watch the stuff in kind of the order that it's laid out on Disney Plus, or did you seek out like watch it chronologically?
Yeah, so I kind of agonized over this for about a week before I actually started the series back in November or December. I had looked at the chronological order, the order they were released, and then there's a bunch of lists out there that are like, oh, you only really need to watch these arcs. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I wanted to watch the whole thing and kind of get invested into it, and I ended up just going with the order it was released, simply because like that's how I would watch the Star Wars movies nowadays. If someone asked me, rewatch them, I would watch them in the order they were released. So that's the way I went about it. But I will say the first few seasons were quite confusing.
Yeah, especially those early anthology things where it's like characters get introduced or like are introduced in an arc later, and you find out after the fact like, oh, this is who they are or something like that. Mm-hmm. Especially with so many of the clones, it was very easy for me to get confused in my first like viewings, and even now I still get confused. Like one of the ones that's in this episode, Waxer, or in these episodes, Waxer, I'm like I remember him, but I don't remember like what his other notable arc is or arcs are, kind of thing. So it's like, okay, like I know the name and they do a good job sometimes kind of coming in and like hardhead or hard light in this one, who's like introduced in this arc, and then he obviously dies off in this arc too, but they give him enough to do that he's easily distinguishable between Fives and Rex and some of the other more prominent characters. And Dogma is another one in these episodes that kind of like you still get enough of a highlight for the sake of these episodes to know who these guys are and how to differentiate them. But throughout like so much of the series, I'm like, wait, is that something Rex did? Is that something Fives did? Is that something so and so else did?
Yeah, especially when you're I'm sure watching it like live and seasons are years apart. It's hard to go back and be like, okay, which markings represent which clone, and what actions has that person done in the past that led to this. You kind of need a recap each time, like a glossary or index of like these are the markings that show Fives or Rex or whatever it is.
Yeah. But you also then, of course, have stuff like the Star Wars fan base, as rabid as they are, will have these kinds of like little pointers that'll be like,
Exactly.
"Hey, this is the reference that's being made on Five's helmet here in this episode." And I was like, I appreciate that. A couple little trivia bits from the General. The Jedi fortune cookie there reads, "The path of ignorance is guided by fear." This is the first appearance of Clone Sergeant Appo, who will end up commanding the 501st Legion during the Order 66 march on the Jedi Temple in Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, although his name is never mentioned in the film. The arrow shape on his helmet, which is not in Revenge of the Sith, is a nod to the character Appa from Avatar: The Last Airbender, a series on which supervising director Dave Filoni previously worked and was also voiced by D. Bradley Baker. So I was like, oh, okay, I appreciate that little animation nod. Plan of descent, the Jedi fortune cookie, is the wise man leads, the strong man follows, which very much ties into the Krell's like refusal to actually be out there with his men, because he's neither. When Hardcase is learning to fly the ship, Fives desperately tries to create an explanation for Krell. The scene is very similar to the famous scene from Episode 4, New Hope, where Han Solo desperately tries to explain to the Imperials that there's nothing wrong during Princess Leia's prison break. Additionally, this is the only time in Star Wars universe where the word alien is used. That was one that really jumped out at me. It's like even in the episode, I was like, oh, it's weird hearing somebody like refer to any of that stuff as alien.
Yeah.
Like it's surprising he didn't just say like the Umbaran ship or something like that.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if it was intentional or if it somehow slipped in there and they were gonna change it. I don't know. It does kind of stick out in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, because everybody is an alien in that.
Right.
And then this for super like techie or super starshipy nerds. This one was in here. This episode introduces the Republic Z-95 Headhunter Starfighter. This ship has similarities to both the Republic ARC 170 and the Rebels T-65 X-Wing. The difference being the number of wings on each starfighter. The Headhunter is often considered the predecessor to the X-Wing. And I was like, nerds.
I gotta say, this is
kind of like extra analysis.
Yeah, I gotta say this is particularly though one of the things I love about kind of the Clone Wars and the prequel era is seeing some of like the de-evolved tech, where they went from the Empire tech and when they were designing this era, kind of taking steps backwards. So whenever stuff like this pops up, I'm like, oh, it looks closer to an X-Wing. We're getting there.
Yep, yeah, kind of bridging the gap between the two eras.
Yeah.
Or because it's not even between, it's still in the first era, so it's just here's the precursor to the new era that you guys know. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, the Carnage of Krell. The Jedi fortune cookie here is our actions define our legacy. First episode where a clone, Rex in this case, mentions Count Dooku by name. When we see Waxer, his helmet has the cartoon image of a Twi'lek child. The child is Numa, the Twi'lek girl that Waxer and Boyle found and rescued in Innocence and Ryleth. And even reading that trivia out here now, I'm like, okay, now I remember who Waxer was. Or now I remember that story arc. And this, sadly, is the last appearance of fan favorite Waxer. And then the line General Krell uses when the clones come into the tower to relieve him of command, "It's treason, then," is the same one eventually used by Palpatine when Jedi come to arrest him after learning he is a Sith Lord in Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So that is the little bit of trivia throughout these 4 episodes. So let's chat. So this is a series of episodes that came out in 2011. It was very much your first time kind of running through them. So how does it hold up for you as somebody new to the series?
So the series as a whole definitely starts off on a slower foot, I think, and it improves each and every season as it goes on, and especially once it gets more into the chronological arcs that are taking place one right after another. Particularly seasons 3, 4, and 5 I thought were really fantastic and definitely hold up. The animation style holds up. Everything looks good. It sounds good. And a lot of the stories there are definitely compelling. And especially this arc in particular was one that I watched and I came out of it thinking that was some of the better Star Wars content I had ever seen, because it does such a good job of getting in with those characters, making each clone feel like a different person. And that's the whole point of the arc too, is that these are more than just clones. They're men, they're soldiers, they have value, and they have their own personalities. And especially when they're kind of arguing between whether or not to follow orders, I think it does such a phenomenal job of highlighting that they are all different and they all think differently. And that's just like one of the few not the few highlights, but that's one of the many highlights rather of the series, is that they are able to do that over multiple episodes, and we're able to see a lot more of the clones and the way that they interact as an army and as units throughout the series that we didn't really get to see in the movies. So I thought that was fantastic and definitely still holds up to this day.
Yeah, I think coming back to this arc for me in particular, and I've been watching like a little bit of Clone Wars here and there alongside the new episodes that are coming out. This arc in particular, like, just stood out as like, I forgot how good and compelling these stories, when it is focused on the clones, can be, and it is largely removed from, you know, the ongoing Jedi versus Sith or Republic versus Separatist strife. I mean, this is certainly still in that strife, but the fact that this is like so heavily focused, like it's even shot like a war film, and the horrors of war film, like the fact that one of the people who worked on Apocalypse Now worked on these 4 episodes. I was like, okay, I get, like, that makes sense, and I can see that influence, I can see that feel and the vibe of it. The fact that like all of the Umbara stuff takes place at night, it's always like tense compared to some of the lighter episodes that you might have. Yeah, I think in particular the story holds up because it has continuing twists and turns, and if you don't remember, like I remember Krell coming in and being like, oh, that's right, he ends up being like a total dick, but I didn't remember like the extent of his total dickness until like rewatching the episodes. So yeah, I think it holds up really well as well, and the series as a whole, I think, is great that like they brought it back for another season here, and the season that's coming out as it comes out, I'm like, okay, like it's the kind of thing I would much rather be binging, because that has pretty much been how I've always experienced the series. Even I came to the Clone Wars late, like when it was probably all on Netflix or something. I could just kind of like watch through the whole thing. I was never really watching it as it aired on Cartoon Network originally, or any of that kind of stuff. But I appreciate that. Like I'm getting these kind of arcs doled out a little bit here and there, and so this is the kind of thing that if I hadn't had this to binge, I would have been very eager to see what happens next, and it would have been like one of those cases, given the history of the show, where I would have been like, you better not like switch off into a different story arc and then come back to like revisit this stuff like years later or something like that. So I appreciate that it is kind of all together, and we get kind of the whole this whole story told in really one setting.
Yeah, and I can kind of relate to that. You know, I've been binging through the entire thing in a matter of months, and now it's all come to a screeching halt where I'm only getting one per week, and it's definitely an adjustment from getting through, you know, multiple episodes every night.
Yeah. So let's talk about some kind of favorite moments and scenes throughout these episodes. Do you have any that you want to kind of jump off with as a highlight?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. I have a few listed here, but I'll start, you know, kind of in chronological order. The initial ground assault that they have at the very beginning of, I believe, Darkness of Umbara was the first episode in the arc, was awesome. It's kind of like you said, it was shot more like a war movie. You see kind of the chaos of war, the fog of war. You know, things are hard to see. You have no idea where the shots are coming from. Some of the gunships are getting shot down. And it kind of gives me the same vibes of a very short scene from Solo, like when he's down on the battlefield. It's all dusty, you can't see anything. There's gunfire everywhere, people are screaming, and that was such a short scene, but it gave us a glimpse into kind of some of the war side of Star Wars that we hadn't seen too much in the movies. And so it gives me similar vibes here, just on a grander scale, where there are people just kind of getting shot everywhere, and you have no idea where the shots are coming from. They have no idea how to fight back at an enemy they can't see. And I thought it was a really good opener to the challenges that they would face down the line fighting on this new planet, where they are so outmatched in terms of home field advantage as well as technology.
Yeah, I agree. That whole opening sequence, I was just like, oh, this is not like what we're getting in the Ahsoka arc right now or something like that. This is a very like pointedly, we're in the middle of the war. This is a very strenuous battle that Anakin is leading his troops on, and yeah, it's dark. It's foggy. You've got creatures that they haven't seen before that are grabbing people and eating troopers and stuff, as well as the actual enemy that they're fighting, the Umbarans, who know their environment far better. That like it is guerrilla warfare, and especially when Krell comes in and tries to like brute force his way through things with no regard to loss of life. It reinforces like the philosophical debate that I have always had, is why I've never had any inclination to join kind of any armed forces. Is like it's great if you've got like a commander that you really feel has your back. That's a great feeling. But then you have somebody like Krell that comes in who doesn't care about you, is just there to try and win the mission, whatever by any means necessary. And you are expected to follow both of them blindly. Basically, I'm like, that's not me. I would be way too much of Fives throughout this arc of constantly questioning and trying to like basically refuse orders and that kind of stuff. So like, oh yeah, this is not my scene.
Right. Yeah, and they do a good job of kind of setting that up at the beginning too with the airstrike, where Anakin calls in. He's like, "We got to get everybody out of here. We can't risk anyone getting hurt." And they fall back, and then he immediately gets pulled from command, and it's just a hard switch over to that brute force tactic. And you can see the men immediately start to look at each other like, "Oh, what are we doing following this guy?" And they also kind of later on start talking about a similar thing, like, well, General Skywalker's reckless, but he's got our back, and it's a calculated type of recklessness that we all go along with. It's not just charging headfirst into death, essentially.
Yeah, and that's like one of the things I really appreciate of this arc is how Krell is introduced and like changes throughout the arc, because he's introduced as this war hero and everybody everybody knows him by reputation. And then you really quickly kind of learn, it's because he has no regard for like the lives of clones, and he has no problem throwing as many clones as he has at the problem, and then just winning by those means. And it's like, well, that's not what we want, because we care about these clones. This is like we're following their story as much as we are following Anakin's and Obi-Wan's and stuff. And then it's even there, like you don't realize that he's like, you get that, okay, a Jedi wouldn't act like that, but you don't get that he's basically completely turned away from being a Jedi until even the final episode, where he's like, I've foreseen, what's coming, and he actually correctly foresees what's coming, but he approaches it by basically saying, I'm doing whatever I can to sabotage things so the Separatists will like see me, and Count Dooku will take me under his wing and make me his apprentice, because that's who's going to be leading in the new era. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're a total dick. Way to go, Krell. Like you were a dick already because you were clearly like racist against clones, but now you're super dick because you're also not even on the Republic side. You've turned your back on being a Jedi. You can dual wield like General Grievous though, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that when he first pulled those out, my first pass watching the episode, I was like, oh wow, all right, this is gonna go somewhere for sure with some lightsaber battles or some sort of large battle at the end. But yeah, when they introduced him, it made him seem like a hero and this master tactician. And as the episodes are going on, I'm like, well, he's really just sending people straight in. So is he actually a master tactician, or what's going on? So by the time you get to the end, I'm honestly not sure if he was just sending clones in because he hates them and he wanted to get rid of as many forces as possible, or if that's just the strategy he always goes with and it works, so he just keeps doing it. I wasn't too sure on which side of the camp I fell on there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely left ambiguous by design, but I like to think that, he's probably always been that reckless with clone lives, and it's just it's more a commentary on what matters, and the story that gets told is that he was victorious. because he's victorious, but like there's also the hint of like he loses a lot of people, but he wins at the end of the day, and that's what people care about. So like they give him a pass on it, and it's not until you're in that platoon and seeing really the cost of his victories that you start to question, hey, how many of those people didn't have to die if he had taken a better approach or been more tactical?
Right.
But people weren't questioning it because he was getting results anyway. So yeah, I think that is a larger meta commentary on on war in general and the stories that get told out of these battles, being glamorizing the victory over the cost of life. So yeah, I thought his whole character arc, it honestly didn't even need the turn to the dark side for me, and it still would have been like a compelling arc.
Yeah, I agree.
Where if it might have even been more compelling if it hadn't been him trying to align with Count Dooku or something like that. It would have been just that he doesn't care about the clones that much, and he is victory at all costs. But then you also wouldn't get the great arc in those last couple episodes of him pitting his own platoon against itself,
right?
By like deceiving them and saying, oh yes, the enemies have gotten our armor and they could be disguised as clone troopers. And then you have that terrible moment of them shooting at each other until Rex, I think, realizes that like we're all clones, everybody stop fighting, and they all start taking off their helmets. Yeah, the chaos war, that is like a commentary that I like. Watching something like 1917 recently, I watched through war movies and I'm like, how did people keep track of who they were shooting at in some of those battles? And like the amount of friendly fire is got to be drastically underreported in any kind of combat like that, because it's like in the chaos, in the madness of everything, you're bound to hit your own friend, even if you're aiming at what to be the enemy. I think that was really visually represented well for me throughout the whole thing, even in that kind of that opening chaos that we talked about earlier. Like you're running at and charging full speed at the enemy, but you've got people behind you that are shooting past you. They're inevitably going to like hit you in the shoulder or something, or take you out too,
right?
Even if they're not intending to. So yeah. Any other highlights that you want to kind of celebrate?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to circle back to the scene there that you talked about where Krell kind of sent the two divisions or the platoons into fighting each other, and he sets it up. He's like, yeah, the Umbarans might be wearing clone armor. You gotta go to this part, and you're gonna have to fight them. In that moment when Rex kind of runs out and takes his helmet off, and he's waving it in the air, and you just see that sinking feeling on all of the clones' faces as they kind of realize what they've just done, and they start cleaning up the dead people and trying to talk to people that are injured about what happened. And it's a really heavy scene that I think does a fantastic job to kind of rally all of the clones, even the ones that were unsure about a mutiny. Really, it kind of does a fantastic job to rally them all together and orient the viewer behind, yeah, we're gonna go take this guy over. We're gonna commit treason for all intents and purposes here, because this has just gone way too far, and this has clearly turned into something more sinister. And I think that scene in particular does just such a phenomenal job of framing that all and giving that last straw for the clones to break on.
Yeah, I think like we already, having watched and knowing these characters, we already know Krell's like a dick. We're like even going into this. So we're like waiting for them to actually like really question him and whatnot. But this gives them all the ammunition they need to basically say, like, it's not even that we're being like treasonous and trying to relieve him of his duty. He just showed his hand as a traitor by pitting us against one another knowingly and trying to have us kill each other, rather than support the mission that we're actually here to do. So it does a great job of kind of opening their eyes to the reality of the situation, to bring everybody else in line with where Rex and Fives were maybe already heading.
Yeah, and that scene where he turns around and he says it's treason then, and they all are surrounding him, and he pushes them all with the Force and kind of jumps out. The animation of that scene where he jumps out and kind of ignites the lightsabers on the way out and does like a flip to the ground it's a fantastic shot just from an animation and I guess cinematography, but just the way it's angled and everything is really great. And just the tension in that room when he turns around and says it's treason, then is because that they're, even though there's a bunch of clones, they're way outmatched. This guy has 2 double lightsabers. Like, you're not gonna get out of that one. So I thought that scene was fantastic and kind of matched the tension of the execution scene as well. Kind of waiting to see where all the clones would end up on that one.
Yeah, and I think that's I think it's very appropriate that it ends up being Dogma who kills him basically, because it's like he's the one who believed in Krell the most, and has clearly fallen the furthest. So that's going to be a traumatic experience for him to undertake. Like he betrayed his brothers in support of this guy who was lying and using him deliberately to like further his ambition and further his designs. So he snaps and takes Five's gun and shoots Krell in the back. Basically, it's like, well, he's definitely also going to get court-martialed, but you also can't fault the guy. Like, Krell couldn't continue on being who he was, and it would have been too he caused too much death and destruction. That like he couldn't continue on into a future arc or something like that. But very traumatic that it ends up being Dogma that kind of pulls the trigger.
Yeah, and that's one of those many like kind of little mini character arcs that happen throughout this 4-episode larger arc. And I thought that one really put the cap on it, that this is definitely one of the best 4-episode arcs in Clone Wars. That they were able to round it out with that, Dogma kind of coming full circle on that. Even towards the end when they were chasing down Krell into the forest or whatever you want to call it, Dogma was still trying to stop them, and you see that moment on his face where he's like, everyone else around me has turned on this guy, and I haven't yet. Am I the one in the wrong? And you kind of see him have that realization. And for him to come around and actually do the final deed and take out Krell was a fantastic way to circle back onto that one. And then you also throughout this arc get to know Fives and Rex and all the different clones more. But I think it does a great job of representing how unique Rex is, in that he kind of hits that balance between following orders but also trying to protect his men. And obviously that's one of the key themes with Rex, and that's kind of his arc across these 4. But it gives you a lot more characterization for the rest of the series as a whole, with Rex being Anakin's kind of right-hand man in terms of clones, that you see it later on as well, and it kind of harkens back to this 4-episode arc. So it does a really great job of giving Rex that deeper character and showing us more about what his values are.
Yeah. I think one of the other things that I appreciate is, and it's like they don't call a significant amount of attention to it or anything, but it's a subtle thing, in that the thing that ends up like being Krell's undoing when he's out fighting all the troopers is that he wasn't out in the battle, so he doesn't know the terrain, he doesn't know the obstacles that they were facing, like the tentacle monster that they end up using kind of as to their advantage to bring him down. I think is another like if he had been more out there in the shit with Anakin, basically, or like Anakin was, he would have known to expect something like that, or to how to avoid it or something like that.
Exactly.
So I appreciate that. Like that's how they are able to get him and get him stunned, basically, because otherwise, he has 2 double-bladed lightsabers. They're just cannon fodder to him.
Exactly, and he can move so much faster and use the Force and all that stuff. So it shows also, like, throughout the arc and in that particular scene, the clones' kind of ingenuity to use what was against them beforehand with the Sarlacc looking thing, if it even is a Sarlacc, but they kind of used that against him, and that's something that took a few of them out beforehand. They've kind of learned from it. So it does a really good job of kind of turning the planet into an ally almost.
Yeah, and it, like, in the wider story of things, it even helps establish, hey, yeah, these guys, especially if they have the jump on Jedi, these guys are capable enough to be able to take out Jedi, a la Order 66, that they eventually will. So yeah. One of the other little like highlights that I appreciated is kind of the whole arc of them learning to fly the alien craft and stuff, and just the design of that alien craft and how it's controlled and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. I really like. I thought that was a really cool. It like everything we see on the Republic side of things is very mechanical in nature, and the fact that this was a much more organic kind of feeling thing. Even the like the giant centipede like tank things that they have
Yeah.
for lack of a better descriptor, like it all feels like it came from the planet, and they're just kind of figuring out how to maximize and how to use the Umbarans are trying to figure out how to use all that stuff. So I appreciate kind of the whole arc there of them sneaking in, getting a couple of these things, and being able to use the Umbaran tech against them, even though that's not what Krell wanted them to do at all. Like they've figured out how to make it work, and then they have that very pointed homage to Phantom Menace, where they even say like, General Skywalker told me he did this when he was a kid, and he said, "Here's the trick, and here's what you got to do." And so they go off and they take out the generator on the Separatist ship by doing that, and Hardlight gets his kind of like hero moment in that, where he sacrifices himself for the mission.
Yeah, it was cool that they echoed definitely that episode 1 arc and kind of that reference as well, with going up to take out the ship and stealing the ship and kind of figuring out how to fly it. I really liked that, and in particular just the Umbaran technology and somewhat the juxtaposition of the Umbarans in general, because the battle on Umbara is loosely, I guess, kind of a Vietnam-esque battle, I think was the idea in doing some research on the background. But you also have the Umbarans who are highly technologically advanced, but they're still using these kind of guerrilla tactics. They're using the fog to their advantage, and they're kind of hiding in plain sight and just kind of waiting to use this technology. And there's so many little nuances to their technology. Like you said, they clearly take a lot of influence from the planet itself, and they help utilize that to their advantage, so they can maneuver the terrain or underground, like with those centipede-looking tanks. And they have like the gas on their helmets. When I watched it the first time, I thought it was maybe just like a rebreather. I'm like, it's odd that these people have made this planet their home if they can't breathe here. But it's got like a chemical mixture in it. They can breathe without it, but it's essentially pre-workout for combat. It like helps focus them and prepare them for combat. But if it mixes with the oxygen in the air, they die. So if it cracks, they die anyways. Seems kind of counterintuitive, but there's so many interesting designs that Lucasfilm was able to come up with for this planet and the battle in general, and that kind of juxtaposition between the guerrilla warfare, but the high technology certainly added to the unique nature of the arc.
Yeah, and I like that their masks there being a very like high risk, high reward kind of thing. It's like, these will help you guys out in battle, but the slightest little crack and you guys are dead. So
yeah,
it is a significant trade off there. Any other moments or sequences you want to highlight and celebrate?
So I think the assault on the airbase, I believe it was in the second episode of the arc. In particular, that kind of comes back to the chaos with all the tanks going around, and they have no idea how to fight this stuff. They don't know they're definitely outgunned. They don't know how to fight back necessarily, and Krell is still just like push forward, just keep pushing forward. We have, I believe Rex calls in for reinforcements, and Krell says, no, they're guarding the canyon, so you guys can keep pushing forward. And then immediately one of the clones comes up and says, we're in the formation you requested. Should we go help them? And he was like, no. So clearly he had these reinforcements waiting. He could have sent them down to help, but he just wanted these clones to press forward to prove a point, and if they died, it was fine. They just had more reinforcements to throw at the problem. He wasn't trying to come up with a way to stop these tanks or do anything differently other than march forward, and that clearly just wasn't going to work. So that was kind of some of the early points of where you could see Krell was almost spiteful with the clones and trying to prove his command was effective, or at the very least just prove that clones were incapable of doing the job well.
Yeah, and that's that in particular, I think is one of the first sequences where I was like, because I don't think they really call out about it until later, but the idea that like, oh yeah, Krell is just standing back and watching from afar instead of being out there like Anakin is or like Obi-Wan is. Like the fact that he is playing the more, traditional stereotypical general of leading from, the base camp or something like that, instead of being out there with his troops. That definitely immediately makes you weirdly appreciate Anakin more, and certainly Obi-Wan more. So yeah, the fact that like Krell's back there, I was like, oh yeah, you're just kind of like a coward who's not actually like you are just throwing bodies and bodies and bodies with the problem. And that's kind of a cheap move especially when you clearly have abilities that could be coming in handy in this. You could be, slicing through these things with your lightsabers, or using your force powers to help your troops, but instead you command from the rear. It was like, oh yeah, like I often encounter in just in work in general, you have leaders and then you have like bosses, and he is very much a boss.
Yeah.
He is not somebody out there leading with people. He is out there making his commands, and if you don't follow them, like he will rain hellfire on you basically. And it's like, yeah, you're the person I would hate to work for.
Yeah, he's very much the guy that's like, I have the power here. I could kill any of you at a moment's notice, so you're going to follow my orders and you're going to like it, or that might be your fate. When he threatens Fives earlier on with the lightsaber, it's very much kind of echoing that he's in charge, he's got the power, and you don't have to like him, but you're going to follow the orders anyways. And like you said, it helps you appreciate Anakin and Obi-Wan more, and just kind of some of the differences and the nuances between the Jedi's leading. They have this common code, but when they're out on the battlefield, they all have their different styles. And but up until this point, we've always seen the generals, generally speaking, respecting their clones. They have good relationships with them, or at the very least, they respect their lives enough to make smart tactical decisions and not take a brute force approach, for the large part of what we've seen. But it definitely highlights how each of the Jedi think differently and kind of interpret the Jedi code differently.
Yeah. Any other moments you want to highlight?
I think that is mostly it.
All right. So then let's dive into kind of the report card, grading Clone Wars on a whole, or in particular this sequence, from an A+ to F. Where do you fall?
This sequence in particular, I would rate A+. I think this is some of the best the Clone Wars has to offer.
I echo that.
Yeah. And as a series as a whole, I think season 1 and 2 kind of weigh it down a bit. And so I'd probably put it in the B+, A- territory. But if you're only looking at kind of watching the quote unquote arcs that matter, I would put it up in the A to A+ range for sure in terms of Star Wars content.
Yeah, I think I echo all that pretty much. These 4 episodes in particular, hopping in, it is a war movie that you're basically watching. It has a great beginning, middle, and end. A+ across the board across these 4 episodes, and then breaking it out to the wider Clone Wars, especially as I have started like rewatching it and going through some of those rough patches of the first season or 2. And then there are a ton of those episodes where I'm just like, oh, I know I'm getting into a Jar Jar episode. I'm not going to like this.
Yeah.
Like they try their hardest, but I can't get behind him. Or the episodes where you have like just C-3PO and R2-D2 or something like that. It's like, this isn't what I want to be watching this show for. So there are a few duds throughout the mix, but overall I would say it's a B to an A kind of level show. Mm-hmm. So yeah, a little bit of extra credit for anybody who watches Clone Wars and is interested in more like it. You have, of course, the Clone Wars movie. You have The Mandalorian. You have Star Wars Rebels. You have Star Wars Resistance. And then you start getting into the mainline Star Wars films. It actually recommends Rogue One first. And I was like, okay, I guess I get that. It's weird that it doesn't recommend any of the prequels, because the other 3 recommendations that they'll give you are New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. But then at the same time, like, I get it. Like, the Clone Wars is one of the best things that came out of the prequels. So I get that, the algorithm that Disney Plus has is people are much more inclined to watch the original trilogy than.
Yeah, if you go from Clone Wars to Attack of the Clones, you're in for a rude awakening.
Yeah. So, anything else you watching on Disney Plus these days?
Yeah, so I've been watching the Imagineering story a little bit, and
Okay.
then I am just about to kick up onto Star Wars Resistance. So kind of getting through the rest of the Star Wars stories, and then obviously Clone Wars that's currently running the final season. I've been watching that. Yep.
Have you watched Star Wars Rebels?
No, I have not yet. Should I watch that first?
Rebels is definitely a more continuation of the Clone Wars type story.
Okay.
It's that animation style and some of the characters. It basically takes place between, it takes place closer to A New Hope. So it's I want to say it's in like the year or two before the events of A New Hope is where kind of Rebels exists. So you have some characters from this era that will occasionally make reappearances in Rebels. So it's a nice continuation. I think it's a more direct continuation, whereas Resistance is a different. Like it's I actually I can't speak to Resistance really. I just know animation style wise it's vastly different, and so I imagine it takes a more different tact, whereas Rebels was very much the spiritual successor to Clone Wars after Clone Wars had ended. So and whereas Clone Wars is very anthological. Rebels is pretty much here's a continuous story we're going to tell. It still has many arcs throughout, but you're following the same cast of characters throughout that series. So I highly recommend Rebels. And it's the series I had not watched until Disney Plus came out, and then I basically, like the first month of Disney Plus, I just watched through all the seasons of Rebels that came out and really enjoyed it. So
awesome.
So yeah, I highly recommend that. How are you liking Imagineering story?
It's really good so far. I've only really seen the first episode, so I'm a big kind of like amusement park and specifically Disney park fan. So getting kind of these behind the scenes look at everything is really interesting to me, and I think they did a fantastic job with just the way they shot it and set it up and do all the show and stuff like that. It's a fantastic show, and hopefully they continue doing it in the future.
Yeah, I'll be very interested to see, because the season that they have basically, like, so you've watched the first episode. It kind of continues chronologically, and the season ends with like, hey, here's a peek at like what the Rise of the Resistance ride is going to look like, because it came out, a month or two before they released that. So it's kind of like they could certainly pick it up for another season and just dive into more stories, but the whole thing was originally intended as a single documentary film. So the fact that they kind of stretched it out into a series as it is, it's like, I don't know if they intend on bringing it back anymore. But I'm a sucker for all those stories and all that history and stuff. So if there are plenty of more things that they could dive into and do deeper dives on some of those things. So I would love to see that as well. But we will see. So I sat down. Onward just came to Disney Plus, and I had caught that movie. It was one of the last movies I saw in theaters before kind of everything started closing down. And so I sat down and watched that again. Really enjoy that movie. So if you have Disney Plus, I highly recommend checking that out. And then I think I also threw on like Frozen 2 just to like mindlessly let something play while I was like diving into more Animal Crossing stuff or something like that. So, but yeah, yay Disney Plus for having that in these darker times.
Right. Something new to watch.
Yeah. So yeah, that's gonna do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you so much, Steve, for coming on, being our first non-That Nerdy Site guest. You can follow Steve at NerdGuySteve. Anything you want to shout out or plug?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at NerdGuySteve, or if you want to follow just the podcast specifically, you can follow at GlitchPoint on Twitter, both of which kind of tweet about the show interchangeably, but if you just want show updates, you can get it at GlitchPoint, and then you can find Speedrun on all major podcast platforms.
Great. You can follow me over at Trevor J. Starkey. Just kind of keep an eye on all the new podcasts we're doing over at That Nerdy Site. Pretty much almost every weekday we have a new episode go up of something. So you can check out all that stuff. If you would like to be on the show, you can go to thatnerdysite.com/D+guest, just like Steve did, and let us know what Disney Plus offering you would like to chat about. It's a little Google form. Really easy to fill out. If you liked what you heard, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends, all that good stuff. And if you do feel so inclined, you can always help support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Thank you for joining me, Steve. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
It was a pleasure to be
actually
here.
The first time we've really even interacted here.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining me on this. Great chatting with you, and I look forward to hoping to collaborate in the future again.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other. Class dismissed.